It doesn't matter whether you judge this game by the standards of a small team indie project or by the standards of all games at large. Chained Echoes is a genuinely great game. It's also a testament to what one man can accomplish with sufficient skill and long term planning, because this game has no business being as well realized and thorough as it is. You can see the loving touch of a careful creator in so many different systems and so many different points of this game. This game is an absolute inspiration for anyone with even the slightest inkling of being a solo creator. I strongly recommend this game to anyone who enjoys SNES or PS1 era JRPGs because it's more than a simple homage. It's one of the best JRPGs I've played in quite some time. There are intelligent game design choices in virtually every system, from battle to world exploration to character leveling. Everything fits together, and those three are just the star of the show. The game is going to hold special appeal to anybody who enjoys flexible combat systems and hates grinding. That said, the game has its flaws. There are many dissonant moments where characters state, "That's the wrong way," and override player input as if they magically know the plot's in another direction. Occasionally, there are narrative reasons for these events, but in almost all cases, it would make more sense to just have an in world block or gate to lock out the area. There are some initially confusing elements within the menus, such as having to hit the back button to finalize a sale. There are also moments where the writing feels uneven. However, I should say nothing rose up and ruined my time with the game. The highs and lows of the one man writing team come through here, as there are some elements that feel very fresh, while others need a little more detail or to have a stronger connection to the plot. I bring up these complaints to make it clear that I'm not grading this game on a curve despite my heavy bias towards solo creators. I see the game's flaws, but the upsides drown them out. I'm not a completionist by any stretch of the word. However, my sheer satisfaction with both the world and gameplay systems of Chained Echoes led to me to chase down every major side quest in the game. I added at least 10 hours to my total playtime, and I consider all of those hours well spent. I loved combat whether on foot or in mechs. I had a great time optimizing crystal loadouts and making deadly synergies between characters. I had a fun time finding buried treasure. It was a nice diversion once all the enemies in an area had been cleared out. The reward board also had a great mix of simple and complex challenges that really kept the game engaging. This is a very system heavy game that somehow still manages to be light on traditional JRPG tedium. The gameplay and plot soar during the excellent middle 50% of the game, and in this rough window, your character upgrades and understanding of the game engine will make you strong, yet you still have a massive amount of the game left to explore. The scope and thoroughness of this game is phenomenal and beyond any reasonable expectation of what a one man team could produce. This game is large enough to be meaty, yet small enough not to be a pointless time sink. I played this game on Steam Deck and PC using an 8-bit Do Pro 2 and an NYXI Wizard in Nintendo button layout. I won't put any major spoilers in this video, yet please know some of my gameplay footage is from the later stages of the game. If you're interested at all in 90s JRPGs and want to come in fresh, go buy this game right now. There's a really high chance you'll have a good time. Take up your sword, channel your magic, or board your mech. Chained Echoes is a 16-bit style RPG set in a fantasy world where dragons are as common as piloted mechanical suits. The game's premise offers no real hints about the story, and yet I bought the game because it's a one-man 90s throwback RPG project that I vaguely remember hearing about during its Kickstarter days. In the distant past, I wanted to make a sprawling solo RPG. My delusions weren't quite as bad as the one-man AAA MMORPG pipe dream, and yet I crashed, burned, and had to shelve that dream all the same. That's the exact reason why I have such a soft spot for solo and small projects. I love seeing people succeed, even in races where I never left the starting block. Throughout my time with this game, I was in awe at what the creator, Matthias Linda, accomplished. He did everything but the music. That single focus gives the game a distinct personality and lets a unique tone shine throughout the game. It's nostalgic without being a soulless, focus grouped mess. Although it has its rough edges, the design conveys a single minded sharpness that is extremely enjoyable. The intro sequence is great as both a Chrono Trigger spoof and a tone setter. Showing Glenn and Killian's relationship dynamic from the start creates a strong foundation for each character. The game's distinct and punchy tone instantly seized my attention. The game uses a multi perspective ensemble cast to tell its story. This costs the tale some early momentum as each perspective has to show its starting point. I'm fine with the slow pace, but none of the other character introductions live up to the sharp presentation and pacing of Glenn and Killian's intro. Some early plot elements don't come back as strongly as I would have liked. In part, I consider that a trade off of having a one man dev team. The writing could have benefited from a tightening pass to better refine that core vision. I also suspect that some of these shortcomings can be ameliorated with a strong sequel that increases the payoffs and shows the audience why he wrote certain scenes the way he did. The game's epilogue points to the story's sequel potential and has me hoping that he'll stick the landing on some plot threads that remain up in the air. The game flies from genre to genre with the vision of just toss it in. Players are treated to a mix of mechs, magic, high fantasy, sci fi fantasy, and even ancient conspiracy. When aspects don't perfectly fit together from a world building sense, Linda leans heavily towards fun. The tone of the story and the world allows for some craziness that's totally acceptable in the pursuit of a good time. Linda's love of Final Fantasy VI and Chrono Trigger really shines through, and I wouldn't be surprised if he also turned out to be a fan of Berserk. There's one particular subplot with Killian that really jumped out at me for its dark undertone. Without spoiling it, I love the fact that in a game where you fight a magical shish kebab twice, the plot still goes to dark and bitter places. Having a solo creator removes normalizing influences that would naturally come about when working with a team. Sometimes this leads to really cool moments, other times it can lead plot and characters astray. As I mentioned before, the start is the weakest part of the game. The party comes together too quickly to properly give weight to every character's motivation. This prevents the ensemble from really gelling for some time. For example, Glenn is fairly generic, neither hateable nor lovable as a main character, until he gets his mid story character development, which effectively subverts a lot of JRPG tropes. Given the importance of his choices as he grows out of being a standard player surrogate, I wish we got a deeper look into his motivations during the late game. Meanwhile, other characters like Rob start with a basic conceit and never really become intriguing. Even after doing his side quest, I hated him as a damage dealer, I hated him as a debuffer, and I hated him for his dialogue. I spent the whole game hoping he'd die, as his character writing didn't present the range of Killian or the hidden depths of Lean, Sienna, and Victor. For all my interest in the cast, you simply get too many party members too early and too many too late. This complaint isn't world ending, as it's better than JRPGs like Earthbound, where much of the early going is a solo mission that bogs down combat. So much of the debuff centric gameplay benefits from having multiple characters to apply, extend, and exploit debuffs. For my complaints about some characters' writing, character in a game is often best expressed via their skills during gameplay. Still, by the time I got some of the last party members, it was too late to really loop them in or feel them out. Tonally, some were just too out there for me, Tomka in particular. As with many RPGs, the optional or late additions to your party often come across as narrative afterthoughts despite providing interesting gameplay wrinkles. This isn't a major complaint as these bonus characters are easily ignored. The core cast offers more than enough variety within standard combat. Between crystals and the class system, you can modify your favorite characters to fit into many party configurations. Still, characters have a core identity and are not perfectly interchangeable. There are quite a few party switch-ups throughout the game, the best of which occurs during a section where the entire party gets separated at a bridge, and multiple groups must take unique paths to reunite at an inn. These minor branches provided great space for character building and mixed up gameplay at the same time. Almost every fight is enjoyable in Chained Echoes, and Linda really takes advantage of that fact. These segments force you to pursue new strategies and challenge your understanding of the battle mechanics. The only downside to these parts was that the game completely undid my battle formations. Sometimes the party splits were so brief that it made redoing the formations a chore. Matthias Linda developed the first sections of the game part time. After a successful Kickstarter campaign, he shifted to full time development. It's safe to say most studios wouldn't have hired him to serve as game director or lead designer in his debut role, and yet the core gameplay design and tight interlock between various systems are the mechanically strongest aspects of the game. Indie games are amazing because small teams with strong vision and the ability to execute can achieve greatness. Now that Linda's proven, I hope he builds a complete team around him and delivers a successful follow-up. He wasn't a programmer by trade and appears to have had more of an artistic background. In interviews, he mentions learning on the fly and making use of the Unity store to fill in for his shortcomings. I love that mindset of just going out and making things happen regardless of what skills you have or need to acquire. Matthias Linda openly admitted to having no musical knowledge, which led to an excellent project management choice in hiring out everything on the musical front. In the early goings, I found the soundtrack completely acceptable. Each track was fitting, everything was competently done, yet nothing really made me want to buy the music. The main battle and overworld themes burrowed into my head more so due to sheer repetition than pronounced interest. Everything changed abruptly when I reached Perpetua. That song hooked me from the first measure and reeled me in. It's legitimately a grade A, listen to it on the regular track, and easily stands out as the best in the game. I don't usually stop in place to listen to game music unless we're on the Chrono Trigger, Donkey Kong Country 2, Earthbound, or Ocarina of Time tiers, and I'm not going to yet put the Perpetua theme on that level. I'm definitely going to need to listen to it on loop and repeat for another 10 years at least. However, I can say that it is such a good song and justifies purchasing the entire soundtrack album. As a bonus, the sound effects in the region synergize extremely well with that soundtrack. I might be drawing a blank, but I don't know of any game soundtrack song that quite scratches the itch that Perpetua's background music does. And honestly, if you know of any other song in this ballpark, feel free to enlighten me. As a side note, I'm not a major fan of modern games trending towards atmospheric music at the cost of melodic music. It's actually one of my biggest complaints with Zelda Breath of the Wild. I understand the rationale and might very well do the same were I directing a modern open world game. However, the melodic music of years past will always be my preference. Chained Echo's soundtrack fits the old mold with strong melodies and instrumentation. Many songs really grew on me as the story went along, such as Forgotten by Light, The Road to Redemption, and the huge theme Iron Scraps for Breakfast. Watching the credits, I found that various session musicians had been hired, including singers. This was another excellent choice that paid off, as I love what the composer pulled off of vocals. I don't have a hard breakdown for every song, but my biggest standouts were songs with choral elements or vocal hits. Should this composer return for a sequel, I hope that he doubles down on that path because he truly has something special here. Chained Echoes makes a solid departure from the RPG formula of experience points leading to new levels, needing to new abilities, without leaving players completely unmoored. In some ways, that probably made the game easier to balance. You can't really outlevel the game by design, as the largest sense of progression comes from piecemeal, manually selected stat upgrades. Skills can be upgraded, but ultimately up to a cap. I'm decidedly against grinding, but I enjoy JRPGs, so I'm often left without a comfortable seat at the table. Chained Echoes delivers heavily for me in this regard. The game is somewhat boxed in by having predetermined stat boosts, but to me that's a fair trade-off. I'd rather have that than have my characters be too underleveled to get through a critical boss or so grossly overpowered that the game becomes a cakewalk. I had quite a few deaths, but given the flexibility of skill setups and formations, I always found it an enjoyable way to win the fight. The difficulty to power balance is at its best in the middle 50% of the game. I'd say that's true for most RPGs, though Chained Echoes held more than enough momentum for the endgame to remain fun as well. Matthias Linda designed a top-tier combat system. Although I covered leveling first, combat itself is clearly the star of the show. By removing grinding and blunting the impact of RNG and character progression, each battle in the game is forced to revolve around strong intent from both the player and the creator. Overdrive punishes you for spamming attacks and rewards you for coordination. On foot, you start every battle in the yellow, which is neutral. You neither take more damage nor do you deal more, and your skills require a standard amount of technique points. Most actions increase your overdrive, so it isn't long before you reach the green tier, which lets your characters fight at peak efficiency. When you're in the red, you take more damage and use more TP. Speaking of which, HP and TP are renewed after every battle, which completely fixes the common RPG flaw of hoarding TP. There's no need to be precious with your special attacks, and the battle design expects you to make good use of specials. Abilities that would be junk tier in many other JRPGs are actually fun to use here. Poison, debuffs, and supports actually make sense in both regular and boss fights. Defense lowers your overdrive gauge, which gives you an incentive to slow down combat when the going gets tough. Crystals, weapons, and armor upgrades go a long way to driving the game's sense of progression. Equipment is doled out zone by zone for the most part, but materials can be used to upgrade weapons and armor to outperform items 1 or 2 tiers up. Then crystals can be placed into weapons and armor to add passive abilities. This seemingly simple design gains massive momentum once you understand how to synthesize strong one-slot crystals. Then you can combine those effects with each character's strengths, such as Paralyze on hit and critical hit boost for Sienna. Additionally, you can set up combos such as giving Glenn Wet Strike, hitting all enemies to apply the Wet debuff, and then using Lean's Wind Jump to exploit said debuff. The crystal system connects back to exploration, as you find crystal deposits throughout the world. If you harvest a specific type of crystal, you're more likely to find it on your next harvesting attempt. This makes it easier to build powerful variants of specific crystals and blunts the impact of bad random number generation. This simple hook between exploration, crystals, and combat makes for a tight and thoroughly enjoyable gameplay loop. For as much fun as I had with crystals, I will say the ultimate weapons and armor weren't particularly engaging. Just another increment along the same lines as all the rest. I would have liked to see completely game breaking items with more gem slots, passive effects, and maybe even strange passive effects. Even a bigger stat bump would have satisfied me. I got a few ultimate weapons and armor, yet given that I'm not a 100% platinum trophy or achievements player, they really didn't do anything special for me. Much of Chained Echo's difficulty comes from the complexity of the systems. The game flow improves dramatically as you get your arms around more and more of the combat and item mechanics. To my recollection, not every bit is perfectly explained. The game drip feeds you, but I didn't fully click with the battle system for some time. However, I strongly prefer it when my improvement in the game isn't just a number going up on the screen. Difficulty can be modified up or down to fine tune the challenge, however, I still found the default settings to be very well balanced. The game rewards you for mastering its systems and punishes mindless grinding with diminished potential rewards. I firmly believe that grinding is best kept in real life and away from video games. Chained Echoes fits my taste perfectly. Progression is still definite. You will absolutely crush early game enemies when you backtrack. However, your characters won't exactly break the game unless you want them to. The game removes the ability to transform into a physical god by fighting a million trash mobs, and yet it doesn't punish you with harsh waves of meaningless battles. When you defeat enemies, they don't respawn for a while, and that makes world map exploration fun. I don't mind looking for buried treasure in hidden caves because I'm not being beaten down by junk encounters every few steps. It's one of the reasons why Chrono Trigger is one of my top 4 games of all time. The difference is there's more to do in the big open zones of Chained Echoes. Once you get sky armors, it's great to see areas open up even further. It's not always sensible where you can land in a real world sense, but it's really fun in a game sense. The freedom of just soaring over areas and exploring is awesome. The end of Act 1 and finally getting your sky armors roughly marks the beginning of my favorite part of the game, the middle 50%. You can explore, but you haven't seen everything. You can acquire items the world map's been teasing you about all game. Every bit of progress helps as you push forward, and your characters are capable, but they're not quite world beaters yet. The part where RPGs open up is always my favorite bit, and Chained Echoes really delivers at full force during this phase. I sought out a lot of side quests and treasure just because I enjoyed the exploration gameplay loop. In particular, I love how the reward board reinforces the ties between combat and exploration. You can fill much of it out by just following the main plot, but the various challenges hint at the game's large scope of optional content. The reward board offers incentives that push players to mix up battle formations, find hidden areas, and hunt down secret monsters via hints from the Adventurers Guild. It's a simple yet elegant system. There's a great feeling when you connect 2 large runs of completed challenges to work your way into more and more gratifying rewards. I won't spoil it with footage, but the Enter the Mind sequences were a great choice. They gave you just enough to be interesting between the ambiance, unique enemies, and the puzzles. Chained Echoes puzzles are excellently balanced, as they're more akin to fun speed bumps rather than hair pulling traffic jams. If I wanted a hardcore puzzle, I'd seek out a puzzle game. This game doesn't lose its identity within its subsystems. Unless there's something huge I'm missing, I don't think this one has unique story elements to cover in a new game plus. There are no branches, and from what little I've read, you can do everything on your first save. And honestly, I have no problems with that whatsoever. I love branching endings, but I borderline hate 100% collectathons to get the true ending. If it's not branching due to player choices within the world, I genuinely don't care. This is a rant that I will return to many times in the future. The Ogre Grottos and some optional areas provide additional post-game challenges if the battle system still has you hooked. For me, I had a fun few hours finally getting to the eastern half of the grottos and filling out a few more spots on the reward board. I should also add that in the process of getting additional footage for this review, I stumbled onto an entire secret zone that I had no idea was there before. That kind of just impromptu find is something that is so great and so fun, and it makes backtracking rewarding. Altogether, Chained Echoes is an excellent game for a solo indie developer and a great game by any broader standard. It being an indie game drove my purchase, but it actually being great drove my enjoyment. The start is slow, but once you get used to the quirks of its design, there's a lot of quality to enjoy. The core design really hits the mark for what I love to see in JRPGs. It's not grinding centric, and there's no part of the game which I dread. In the middle 50%, challenge, complexity, and fun were exquisitely balanced in the battle system, and the story hit its best plot points. While I wound up creating overpowered characters by the end, I was still engaged. On a personal level, Chained Echoes is an inspiration. While it didn't come out of absolutely nowhere like Kay's story, it's amazing to see one man pull off something so thorough. There are side quests, base building, a deep combat system, giant mechs with extra wrinkles in the combat system, and a great story that brings everything together. Chained Echoes is sold as an homage, but it rises to the status of a valid competitor. I won't call this game a modern classic just yet. I'll have to return to this game in a few years and see if it holds up to a deeper level of analysis. Even if I'm not living out my collegiate indie dev dreams, I'm glad that someone out there is. I can't wait to see how Matthias Linda follows up Chained Echoes. As always, everything I do is sponsored by yours truly. So you can support my work by buying my work via links in the description or in my About page. My latest novel is titled Coordinated Universal Time Travel, and I'm also working on an African fantasy action adventure series called Lord of Vipers. I'll tell you more about that one soon.